The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Norwood.
Recognized for 2 minutes. Without.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Paul, thank you for the time. I rise to support Mr. Paul's resolution to remove the United States from the WTO, and I hope others in this body will agree with us on that. One of my friends and a man I respect greatly, the distinguished chairman of the Agricultural Committee, said a minute ago that if we remove ourselves from the WTO, the farmers and the ranchers will lose their shirts. Well, we are in the WTO, and the farmers and ranchers are losing their shirts. There is no reason for me to expect, under the present rules of the WTO, that that's going to get a bit better for them without reform. And it has been odd to me that so many distinguished members of this body who have stood up and said, well, we have to stay in the WTO, but it certainly does need changing. It certainly does need reform, but we just need to stay in there so we can change it or reform it. Well, I don't understand that. It requires unanimous consent to make any changes inside the WTO today. And if our leaders in the WTO simply want to try to improve our situation for our cotton farmers and they take it to the WTO, I can assure you that China's going to be there to veto that. If our representatives in the WTO want to improve our situation for our wheat farmers, I can assure you that France, a nation that subsidizes this wheat in order that the price be low and be competitive, is going to be sitting in the WTO to absolutely veto that. Now, what I'd like to do is some of these very distinguished members who want to stay in the WTO, but every one of them almost have come up and said, well, we must reform it. Well, I'm going to stay on the floor and listen to the rest of the debate, and I'd be very pleased if some of them would get up and explain to me how we're going to reform the WTO. I don't believe it can be done without a great threat and or removing ourselves from the WTO. We need to work within an organization. I don't disagree with that. We need world trade. I don't disagree with that. But we need to be in an organization where we indeed have a little more say-so about what happens to the trade in America.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the bill before the House of Representatives today simply says that we should withdraw from the World Trade Organization. If you've listened to the debate today, the question really is not whether we should withdraw. The question is, how should we reform the WTO and what types of reforms we should pursue. And the best example that's been cited today widely is the need to have a more open judicial process that more closely mirrors the process that has served us so well in the United States. So the question before the House today is really, what tactics should we take in order to pursue reform? And I would suggest that what we should do is stand up and act like leaders as expected by other countries and by the citizens we represent here today. And what they expect us to do is to take specific action and not to simply support some blanket general withdrawal of the WTO. So let's begin to debate the specific types of reforms we need to undertake, and let's pursue our rights in the World Trade Organization to lead an effort for a two-thirds vote to pursue more openness and the other types of reforms we've debated today. And let's use our time on the floor more wisely. Let's debate how we can expand the benefits of trade for everybody, how we can expand the winner's circle, how we can begin to open up the benefits of trade to more small and medium-sized businesses so that they too can enjoy the benefits of trade. And let's get back to the debate on what we can do to be an important partner with our states and our local governments to fund the types of job training and education programs that American workers need today to succeed and survive in this global economy. There are tax credits available. There are programs that we know that can work, that can create partnerships between employers and employees, so more of the people we represent can succeed in this global economy. That's the debate we ought to be having today. We ought to defeat this resolution, and we ought to get back to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from Texas continue to reserve his time?
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Let me say to the gentleman that reforms aren't permissible. We can't reform from the Congress. Only they can reform themselves. They work in secret. They have to have a unanimous vote. Our vote is equal to the country of Sudan or whatever. So don't expect it ever to be reformed. The only way we can voice our objection is with this resolution, and there will never be another chance to talk about the WTO for 5 more years. Let me state that the Congress is required to state a constitutional justification for any legislation. The Ways and Means Committee used the Article 1, Section 8 to justify their position on this bill. And let me state their constitutional justification. It says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. It says the Congress. But what we're doing is allowing the WTO to dictate us. Even those in the Ways and Means Committee said they endorse this system of fair trade administered by the WTO. Who's going to decide what is fair? The WTO, and they tell us what to do. And
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay.
The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. I deem one of the essential principles of our government, and consequently one of those which ought to shape its administration. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, I am sure, would be aghast at this. This is what is involved. It's out of the hands of the Congress. It's put in the hands of unelected bureaucrats at the WTO. I would venture to guess even the Hamiltonians would be a bit upset with what we do with trade today. I'm pro-trade. I have voted consistently to trade with other nations with lowering tariffs. But I do not support managed trade by international bureaucrats, and I do not support subsidized trade. Huge corporations in this country like the WTO because they have political clout with it. They like it because they have an edge on their competitors. They can tie their competitors up in court, and they can beat them at it because not everybody has access. You have to be a moneyed interest to have influence at the World Trade Organization. Early today, I predicted that we would win this debate. There is no doubt in my mind that we and the American people have won this debate. We will not win the votes, but we will do well. But we have won the debate because we speak for the truth, and we speak for the Constitution, and we speak for the American people. That is why we have won this debate. It is true there are a lot of complaints about the WTO from those who endorse it. And I think the suggestion from the gentleman from Oregon is a good suggestion. Those who are uncomfortable with the WTO and they do not want to rubber stamp it, if you don't want to rubber stamp this and you don't think it's quite appropriate to vote yes on this resolution, vote present. Send a message. They deserve to hear the message. You have no other way of speaking out. Every 5 years we get a chance to get out of the WTO. You cannot control the WTO. None of us here in the Congress has anything to say. You have to have a unanimous vote. Our vote is equal to all the 134 other countries, and therefore we have very little to say here in the U.S. Congress. Why is it that I have allies on the other side of the aisle where we may well disagree with labor law and environmental law? Very specifically, we agree that the American people have elected us. We have taken an oath of office to obey the Constitution, that we have a responsibility to them, and we should decide what the labor law ought to be. We should decide what the environmental law should be. We should decide what the tax law should be. That's why we have an alliance. But let me remind you, the American people are getting frustrated. They feel this sense of rejection and this loss of control. Because why come to us? We don't have control of the WTO, and they feel like they're being hurt. And this is the reason we're seeing demonstrations. And if this goes on, they say if we didn't have this, we would have anarchy. I predict chaos. I predict chaos from this. This is unmanageable. They'd like to do it in secrecy, and they like to wheel and deal, but it's unmanageable. Let me say there's another reason why we expect chaos in the economy and in trade. It has to do with the trade imbalances. Today we are at record highs. The current account deficit hit another record yesterday. It's 4.5% of the GDP, and it's significant. But unfortunately, the WTO can do nothing about that because that's a currency problem. It's a currency problem. It causes chaos. And yet there will be an attempt by the WTO. Just think of how NAFTA came to the rescue of the Mexican peso immediately after NAFTA was approved. A $50 billion rescue for the politicians and the bankers who loaned money to Mexico. Quite frankly, I have a suspicion that when the Chinese currencies goes to the dump, that will be one of the things that we will do. They will be our trading partner. They're in the family of countries, so therefore we will bail out their currency. That is what I suspect will happen. And why else would the Chinese put up with the nonsense that we pass out about what we're going to do, investigate them and tell them how to write their laws? They have no intention of doing that. I think they do it because there's an interest that they may well see their currency supported by our currency, which is a tax on the American people. This is a sovereignty issue. We do not have the authority in the U.S. House of Representatives to give our authority to the President. We don't have the authority, and we should never permit the President to issue these executive orders the way he does. But this is one step further. We have delivered this sovereignty power to an unelected bunch of bureaucrats at the WTO.
All time for debate has now expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 528, the joint resolution is considered read for amendment, and the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The third reading.
Joint resolution withdrawing the approval of the United States from the agreement establishing the World Trade Organization.
The question is on passage of the joint resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The joint resolution is not passed.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, for what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.